ATCU FM Fort Worth, you've made it to the end of another long work week. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a few guys talking sports for the next hour. This is Friday Night Sports. Here's Ben Otten, James Flowers, and Mitchell LaFave.
What's up, guys, and welcome to Friday Night Sports. I'm Ben Otten, and as always, alongside me tonight are James Flowers and Mitchell LaFave. The World Series is finally here, and wow, did we have a great Game 2 on Wednesday night. We'll get to all that later in the show, though, but guys, let's start with a recap of Week 8 in college football, beginning with the big one, the Saturday night primetime game between unbeaten Penn State and number 19 Michigan. The Nittany Lions, of course, took care of business at home, winning 42-13, and with the loss, Michigan falls out of the top 25. And much of the blame has now been directed at head coach Jim Harbaugh. Do you guys think he's underperformed in his short tenure? I think it's only been about 2+ years here in Ann Arbor.
I think Michigan fans really, when they heard Jim Harbaugh was coming to Michigan, they were expecting a national championship team almost right away, and especially by now. But unfortunately, with the way that coaching carousels where college coaches kind of have 3 years or so to prove themselves. And really, he's not done a bad job by any means. They were considered to be a national championship contender last year until their loss at Iowa. They finished in the top 15 in the final rankings in his first 2 seasons, and they've certainly had a lot of highs under Harbaugh. So for me, I don't think he's underperformed, but Michigan fans would probably tend to disagree.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that he's underperformed. You know, a lot of times when a team doesn't win games, the head coach is blamed. But a lot of times, or not a lot of times, but sometimes it should fall on the players. You know, Harbaugh's 25-8 in his coaching career at Michigan in 2.5 seasons. You know, not bad at all considering the competition in the Big Ten, especially the last 2 years. But the problem for his team this year is that, you know, they've lost some like 30 seniors from last year, and he doesn't have a good set of quarterbacks to lead his offense. And so, you know, Harbaugh has shown that he is a good head coach, and I really don't think it's his fault that Michigan hasn't played all that well this year.
Yeah, you mentioned that 25-8 record, Mitch, and it speaks volumes because the 3 years before he got to Ann Arbor, Michigan was 20-11. So he's definitely turned this program around. I just think when he came, there was so much hype around, you know, this hiring and how he was going to bring Michigan back to what they were in the early 2000s when they were seemingly a national championship contention every year, and it just hasn't quite gotten to that point yet. I think it's. I've always said you've got to give a coach time. I personally believe in Jim Harbaugh. I think once he gets the right guys in, like Mitch said, gets a quarterback, I think that's the biggest thing. He needs a quarterback to lead this offense because on the defensive side of the ball, he's got a great group of athletes, a great group of recruiting classes coming in every year. That side of the ball is fine, but offensively, they have struggled since Jim Harbaugh's gotten there. I just don't think he's found a quarterback, which, in my opinion, is probably the one thing holding this Michigan team back especially.
And when we look at his career at Stanford, it took him 5-6 years to really get it together. And in his last year at Stanford, he led the Cardinal to a fourth-ranked top ranking, and they won the Rose Bowl. So, you know, I totally agree. I think you really have to give him time. And when he went to Stanford, there were very little, if not any, expectations for him to do well. But in Michigan, it's totally opposite. They expected him coming straight from the NFL. Hey, this guy's going to lead us to a championship now. And you got to give him time to get his recruiting classes in and really set the coaching how he wants. And I think the quarterback problem is totally a valid point.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Harbaugh, and with the state of college football today, and even just any sport in general, you don't get a lot of time as a head coach to kind of implement what you want. It's almost like you've got, what have you done for me lately? And if you haven't done much lately, I think in Michigan's case, they certainly have, at least in terms of what fans and critics have expected, they've underperformed, and so that doesn't really play well into the hands of Jim Harbaugh. Also, just a 1-4 record against rivals Ohio State and Michigan State in his tenure to this point. That's not exactly great because, you know, when you're struggling oftentimes at a big school, that can be what keeps your job. Is if you beat the rival every now and then, or pull off an upset against a rival. I think that can keep your job for a while. But Harbaugh has struggled in those games against Ohio State and Michigan State.
In his bowl games, he's got a 500 record as well. So,
I mean, you do mention Michigan State. I would say this year, not necessarily his fault. Weather was definitely a big factor. I think, you know, obviously there could have been different decisions called in the game, but yeah, you were right. He hasn't done all that well against his rivals, but I still don't think he's underperformed overall.
And again, something we've all alluded to so far. There's a lot of surrounding factors that are out of his control. But like we said, the coach is always the one that ends up getting the blame. I think that's been the case for Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. Let's move on to a pretty intriguing Big 12 game over the weekend. Number 10 Oklahoma State went on the road, took on unranked Texas. Cowboys snuck out with a 13-10 win in overtime. It wasn't pretty for Oklahoma State, but they win, and now they get ready for a 3-game stretch against West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Iowa State. Oklahoma State started the season so well. This offense was considered the best in the country through the first 3 weeks. Now all of a sudden they look like they're sputtering a bit. Can you see Oklahoma State being able to turn this around and get into a Big 12 championship game?
I think they have a good chance. They've got to make sure they're one of the top 2 teams in the conference, obviously. But if they go 3-0 in their next 3, they're more than likely going to find themselves in the Big 12 championship game. A loss to Iowa State wouldn't be devastating. A loss to West Virginia also wouldn't be ideal, but a loss to Oklahoma would have so much more riding on it. You go from the rivalry standpoint, aside from that, just the winner might have a shot at the championship game, so there's so much at stake there. And if you go 1-2 in those 3, you pretty much virtually, I don't see how you have much of a shot.
Yeah, it's so tough to say because the Big 12. I think James said it either last week, a couple weeks ago. It's sort of cannibalistic. Like everyone just seems to be beating each other. So it's really tough. Their next 3 games are against ranked opponents. It's really tough. Their offense. Their offense. Their only game against Texas was the only time that they've scored under 30 points. So give credit to the Texas defense for that one. I think if Oklahoma State can get back to their previous offensive ways, I think they can do it, though.
Yeah, Mitch, you mentioned Texas. I was going to say just also that you've got to give them a lot of credit. This is a team that lost to Maryland at the season opener at home, and it wasn't even pretty. And they've turned it around. They've been competitive in some really big games and have just been so close to pulling off that upset and getting that marquee win for Coach Tom Herman in his first year. But they've come up short in every single one of them, whether it's USC or Oklahoma 2 weeks ago, Oklahoma State last week. Do you guys see this as a problem that they just can't win the big games even though they're right there, or progress because of how the season started for the Longhorns?
For me, I would say it's a little bit of progress. Obviously, for what people expect, you could see it as a problem. But, the first game against Maryland, like you mentioned, that was a big problem for them. They seemed unprepared. But I got to give credit for the Longhorns for stepping up. Their defense has been, for the most part, really good. They've been keeping them in games all season. The loss to Maryland was the biggest spread in all their losses. They lost by 10. But the loss to USC, they lost by 3 to USC and Oklahoma State, and then only by 5 to Oklahoma. But what really needs work is their offense. Barring the blowout of San Jose State, their other wins have also been really close. They've been doing well at getting yards. I think they're like 28th in passing yards in the country, but they just can't seem to score. It'll be interesting to see how moving forward with Ellinger and Buechele, but I do believe they're making a bit of progress.
Yeah, I think it's certainly progress. I mentioned that the expectations for Jim Harbaugh were very high when he went to Michigan, and I think the same can be said for Tom Herman. UT was ranked going into the season, which was a surprise to many, including myself, and then they come out and look really flat against Michigan. Maryland. But if you take a big picture look at their season, they smoked San Jose State, lost close games to USC, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State, who were all ranked when they were playing Texas, and beat Iowa State on the road and Kansas State at home. So while maybe not the season Texas fans were expecting, but certainly one to build off of.
Yeah, and similar to Michigan, it's the same thing in Austin. The city of Austin has been, blessed with great college football from the University of Texas for just years on years on years. It seems like they are also in national champion contention for so long. Now it's a little bit different. I don't think that fan base is exactly quite used to this yet. It's almost a rebuilding process for Texas. But in that sense, Tom Herman's done a great job. Looks like he's found himself a quarterback, freshman QB Sam Ellinger, really a true dual threat quarterback. He can beat you with his arms or with his arm or with his legs, and I think that it provides such a balance to this offense. Sophomore wide receiver Colin Johnson has really stepped up, especially against USC in, I think, was it game 2 or 3 of the game 3 of their season. So he's kind of fallen off a little bit since then, but he looks like he has the potential to be a really good number 1 wide receiver. And all in all, it's just a young Texas team. Like Mitch said, they lost to Maryland. They've bounced back since then. They've looked a lot better in every game. I think the wins are coming for Tom Herman's club. It's just a matter of time. You just got to continue to have faith if you're in that locker room, and if you're Tom Herman, that eventually you'll get over the hump and start winning these close games that haven't gone your way the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, and with Sam Ehlinger, true freshman, dual threat, he's done really well having to step in for Shane Buechele. And again, he's making progress, getting better, still learning the system. He made a very questionable throw to end the Oklahoma State game, where he just tossed it up to an open Oklahoma State defender. But I think going forward, he'll learn from his mistakes. And again, like I said, they're making good progress, I think.
Yeah, it's all part of the growing process, especially when you throw out a true freshman quarterback like Texas has. Let's move on to a pretty interesting top 15 matchup between the USC Trojans, who went on the road and took on number 13 Notre Dame. Guys, another rough night for USC quarterback Sam Darnold. We talk about him a lot on this show, and rightfully so. He was so good down the stretch last season, especially that Rose Bowl against Penn State. So much hype surrounding him heading into the season. Things have just not gone his way to start the year. It has been a struggle in almost every game for that USC offense. What happened?
Well, I don't think we can pin all of USC's problems, of course, more so the turnover problems, on Darnold. However, he certainly shares some of the blame. For the first 7 weeks, only 3 FBS teams had more turnovers than USC. The Trojans entered the game with 16 turnovers and left with 19. And Sam Darnold accounted for 2 of those. The offensive line started the season off pretty strong, but since week 3 or 4, the offensive line is really not doing a great job protecting Darnold or letting the run game break through. So, again, kind of a fairly young team. A lot to get through. I know Sam Darnold, the news of he's not sure what his NFL decision is going to be. That I don't know how many waves that really started at USC, but I think for Sam Darnold, there's still a lot of growth to be had for him.
Yeah, and for me, James touched on it a little bit. I really think the key thing is the offensive line. Last year he was only sacked 6 times in all of last season, and this year he's already been dropped 14 times. When you don't have as good of protection, you're going to have to make quicker decisions. You're not going to necessarily have open targets. He's still a young quarterback. He's only a sophomore. He's having to make much quicker decisions than he did last year. And I think he's just forcing too many throws this year because of the pressure he's feeling. And I think that's what's leading to all the turnovers.
And all that being said, I know there was talk, especially in the offseason, about like a couple NFL teams potentially, tanking for that number 1 pick because that was the hype surrounding Sam Darnold. He just hasn't lived up to it at this point. That being said, though, would you guys still take a number 1? Should that NFL, if you were an NFL GM and you needed a quarterback, would you take Sam Darnold with the number 1 pick, or do you feel like there's a better quarterback out there?
No, not right now. To go with that first question, for me, there's too many turnovers. He's got 10 interceptions so far this season, matching last year's total, and we're only 8 games in. There's a lot of talk about him going to the NFL, as we said, but he's shown that he has the talent. He's got a team around him, but he just can't consistently click every game. His passing numbers are not bad, but everything else is just a bit shaky. I really don't think his inexperience would serve him well in the NFL, and the turnover numbers would just worry me too much about as an NFL scout.
So you think it would be best for him to stay another year?
Absolutely. He's not going to win a national championship this year, and I read an article that pointed to Matt Castle and how he should have gone to the NFL a year earlier than he did. But and it eventually hurt his draft stock since he got injured and was a bust, whatnot. But I think it really would serve him best. He won the Rose Bowl, which is nearly the pinnacle last year, and next year I think they're going to be in the national championship talk again for sure.
Yeah, I think and I know Stephen Carr, their running back or one of their running backs, just a true freshman. He's looked really good, and then Deontay Burnett out wide. I think he's only a sophomore, so it's a lot of young talent outside of Sam Darnold. I think if the season continues as it is, I agree with you, James. He'd be better off staying and just getting more accustomed to the college game because I think it's almost one of those things where you got to master the college game before you can go pro. Otherwise, you just end up hurting your confidence.
And some people may say, oh, well, look at what the Bears did with Mitch Trubisky. However, his last season at UNC was pretty good. And not to knock on Sam Darnold, but his season has not been that great. It's been a bit underwhelming. So that's just where I am on that standpoint.
And then also, just one last thing off that, Trubisky, especially in these past couple games for the Bears, hasn't turned the ball over, which I think is so impressive out of a young quarterback. I think that is why Trubisky, obviously, he was a senior, so he had to go. But I think that's why the Bears took a chance on him. They knew he knows how to take care of the ball. I think that was ultimately a big decision, and that you can't really say the same for Sam Darnold right now. Let's move on. A couple interesting scorelines to talk about, especially in the American Conference. Number 16 USF went on the road, beat Tulane by a score of 34-28. Number 20 UCF went on the road, beat Navy 31-21. UCF with despite only scoring 31 points, still maintains their ranking atop the FBS for points per game with averaging 47.3 points per game. And on the flip side, USF broke an FBS record for most consecutive games, scoring 30-plus points. These are teams that don't really get talked about them a lot because their strength of schedule is not very strong, and they don't play high-level competition week in and week out. That's just how the American Conference is right now. But if one of these teams, they play each other in the season, one of the teams is 13-0 at the end of the regular season and is one of 4 unbeatens in college football, should they be in the college football playoff?
I certainly think they deserve consideration. However, if we're going to realistically look at the college football playoff, for example, if Clemson ends the season with 1 loss, so they win out, they win the ACC championship game, or Penn State, if they end the season with 1 loss, would they go into the college football playoff over an undefeated American Conference team? I think so, probably. That's just how that's just how the committee has kind of trended the past couple of years. But really, I wish UCF had been able to play Georgia Tech. That game was canceled because of the hurricane in September. Because had they beaten the Jackets, that would have been a very quality win and really boosted their resume. They blew out Maryland and Memphis. I actually like the Golden Knights a little more than USF right now, just because of UCF's strength of schedule compared to USF's. But I think if one of these teams ends the season undefeated, which only one of them can because they play each other at the last game of the season, I think they should certainly be involved in the college football playoff conversation.
Obviously, Ben, if you didn't mention if they were one of 4 unbeaten schools part, it's a definite no. But like James mentioned, it'd be nice for them to get consideration if they were one of the 4 last unbeaten teams. But again, because it's a non-Power 5 school, the strength of schedule isn't as strong. If a Clemson or I guess even Ohio State, if one of them can
that's
win
who
out,
I was thinking of.
If one of them can win out the rest of the season, then they would get in over an undefeated USF or UCF.
Yeah, I think Ohio State is kind of that team that 1-loss team. They kind of have the resume and the season if they are to go 12-1 and win the Big Ten Conference. I think that's kind of the team that would ultimately keep out USF or UCF should one of those teams be undefeated, because Ohio State's loss would have been albeit at home, but to a really good Oklahoma team. And I think the argument for Ohio State is they played better competition, they have better wins, and their loss is against probably the best team either of those schools would have seen all year had Oklahoma been on either of those 2 schedules. I think it's interesting because obviously TCU would be pretty familiar with the position UCF and USF have been in, being in that college football playoff conversation and then not getting in ultimately when it counted. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on as the rest of the season goes, and that UCF-USF game will be a really fun matchup if both those teams are 11-0 on the final day of the regular season.
Well, and really, this is what the college football playoff is supposed to be. Their goal, or at least their goal that they presented to the public, was that, hey, we want to get these different teams involved. We want to get different conferences involved. Obviously, we're not going to get the MAC involved. That's just unrealistic, as good as those teams may be on Tuesday Night Action. But I just really, if it's going to be the same like Power 5 conference teams each year, this is a bit of a rant, but I don't really see how this is totally different from the BCS era. I know the BCS was there's so many things wrong with it. But if we can get these different teams involved with the college football playoff, I really don't see what's totally different. And we don't have to go down this route because we're going to run out of time. But, I mean, just something to think about.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic for another day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say, it would be great if they could expand, I know that's been a big talk, expanding the college football playoff to, they expanded it to 8 teams, USF or UCF, one of those really good non-Power 5 schools could have a chance to make it to the playoff and at least try and prove themselves. But, right now, with only 4 schools being allowed in the college football playoffs, they just have no shot.
So are you for an 18 playoff?
I am, yes.
James?
I would say it's at least 8. I think 16 would be a bit much, but also pretty intriguing, especially if you end the season a little bit earlier. However, I don't see that happening. There's too many bowl games, too much money in college football right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a really interesting topic. And I think you make a good point because the whole point of the college football playoff, I'll try to keep this as short as possible. The whole point of the college football playoff and human voters was to give like the power of the underdog because the underdog has always appealed to humans. It doesn't appeal to a computer like what the BCS was, and so far we haven't really seen that. So I think you make a good point, James, that this whole college football playoff and having a group that votes on what teams make it to the playoff isn't all that different from having a 2-team national championship that's decided by a computer and some really interesting software. That's pretty much going to do it for our first segment. One more thing before we go, as always, our performances of the week. I'll start with Mitch.
Don't want to sound too much like a homer, but I'm going to go with the TCU defense. They allowed the fewest total yards to an FBS team in the last 20 years. They kept Kansas to 21 total yards. Jackson State put up more yards against TCU. And it was a nice welcome back to Fort Worth for Doug Meacham, I'd like to say.
Okay. My performance of the week comes out of the FCS ranks and James Robinson from Illinois State. The 4-2 Redbirds welcomed the 6-0 Coyotes of South Dakota to Hancock Stadium in Normal, Illinois, and sent the Yotes home with their tails between their legs. Robinson gashed the Coyotes' defense, running the ball 19 times for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. Illinois State dropped 4th-ranked South Dakota after the Redbirds had given up 79 combined points in their 2 most recent games. After 2 rough weeks in Normal, James Robinson leads the way with a big performance to give the Redbirds the upset win.
In my performance of the week, I will stick with that team in Baton Rouge yet again for the second week in a row. LSU junior running back Darius Geis had 22 carries for 276 yards and a touchdown on the ground as the Tigers cruised past Ole Miss 40-24. By the way, if he wasn't alone in the running attack, Geis wasn't for LSU. His fellow mate in the backfield, Darrell Williams, had 103 yards on 22 carries himself. So he splits the load, and they both had outstanding days. But anyway, this is Geis' 3rd career game with over 250 rushing yards. That's an SEC record. Yes, it's more than Herschel Walker, the Georgia legend. Also, this is, like I said, 2nd week in a row, I picked an LSU player for my performance of the week. The biggest thing for me about that is we talked a lot about that loss to Troy on homecoming for LSU, and I think Darius Geis, a junior, the way he performed last week against Ole Miss, and the DJ Chark, my performance of the week last week, the way he performed against Auburn, just kind of guys. We've talked about how when that loss to Troy happened, guys had to step up. It had to be on the players, and you can see that these LSU Tigers are getting a lot better, and I don't think they're to be taken lightly anymore, but we'll find out how good they are in a couple weeks. They obviously get a bye week this week, but then they head all on the road and head to Tuscaloosa to take on top-ranked Alabama, so that is when we'll figure out just how good LSU is. There's one last college football game we haven't talked about yet. Like Mitch already revealed, TCU was dominant in their win over Kansas. We'll break that one down for you right after this.
When I grow up, I want to be a new pair of blue jeans.
When I grow up, I want to be a kid's first computer.
I want to be a warm fleece on a cold
I want to
day.
be a football
I want to be
stadium.
a bike that races around the country.
I want to be a bench on a forest trail.
When I grow up, I don't want to be a piece of garbage. And if you recycle me, I won't be.
Give your garbage another life. Recycle. Learn how at iwanttoberecycled.org. Brought to you by Keep America Beautiful and the Ad Council.
Have you heard the buzz about West Nile virus? Protect yourself and your family from the mosquito bites that spread the virus. When you go outside, use mosquito repellent containing DEET. When possible, wear long-sleeve shirts and pants. And remove standing water around your home where mosquitoes breed. Anyone can become infected, but if you're over 50, you're at higher risk for severe disease or even death from West Nile virus. Remember, the best defense comes from things you can do yourself. Fight the bite. Tell mosquitoes to buzz off.
Welcome back to Friday Night Sports. I'm Ben Ott, alongside me, James Flowers and Mitchell LaFave. Like I said before the break, TCU welcomed the 1-6 Kansas Jayhawks to town last weekend and routed Kansas by a score of 43-0 as the Horned Frogs stayed unbeaten, improving to 7-0 on the season. Mitch said it before the break in his performance of the week. I'll repeat it because it is worth repeating. Kansas totaled just 21 yards in Saturday's game, the fewest ever by an FBS team in the last 20 years. Defense gets all the talk, but another thing for me, I really was impressed with Kenny Hill. Another day of high completion percentage. He was 8 of 15 on third down, and 12 different guys caught a pass. Just more of the same that we've seen all year from Kenny Hill.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and he also matched his career high with 5 touchdown passes. It's not much that we've seen from Kenny Hill. Like earlier in the season, a lot of times been, being more of a game manager, getting the completed passes when he needed to, but this game against Kansas, he really stepped up, had a great completion percentage, didn't, have an insane amount of yards, but he's getting the completions down, and he's finding open receivers so much better than he was last year.
Yeah, he's close to eclipsing the 2,000-yard passing mark, and his completion rate is at 70%, which is very good for the season, and he's at a 5-to-1 touchdown-interception ratio. So, once again, not doing too much, making plays when he needs to, and he's happy to let other players do their thing, and John Diarse and Kyle Hicks, who's finally healthy, and Darius Anderson as well.
Yeah, and I'll let you guys touch on this if you want, just kind of in more of a larger picture. As for the records coming into the games and the way that both teams have been playing, this kind of scoreline wasn't exactly expected, but you wouldn't have been all that surprised to see it. But in the same sense, it was also unexpected because in the last 2 years, Kansas has played TCU right down to the wire. I think they've only lost by less than a touchdown in each of the last 3 years, so it's been a close game every time these two teams meet. And all of a sudden, last Saturday night, it was a completely different scoreline and outcome than it has been in the past couple years.
Yeah, 43 points that TCU scored has been the most in the series that they've played against Kansas. And the margin of victory alone was more than 35 points that had decided the previous 5 TCU wins against Kansas. So again, Kansas has played TCU well the past couple years. This year, just a completely different story.
Yeah, I think they really needed this win over Kansas specifically, just because of the history between them. But I wouldn't say, hey, it's a good win. It's an expected win, really. It's one that they needed to have a good performance. They couldn't have a lackluster, kind of falling apart game against a Kansas team who hasn't beaten an FBS team not named Texas in 1,083 days. So, yeah, a lot. So a great win, obviously, but just another win in the books and time to move on.
Yeah, I think you've almost just mimicked exactly what I would assume Gary Patterson would be saying to his guys. Yeah, it was a good performance. You played well, but you were expected to play well. Don't let it get to your head. You haven't let it get to your head all year, and I think TCU's kind of still taken on that underdog mentality to this point. That cannot change because we'll get to it a little bit later in the show, but Iowa State and Texas pose some serious threats if TCU's going to kind of navigate their way through the rest of October and into a really tough November.
Yeah, we'll preview Iowa State a little bit later, but Texas, a very good road team. They've lost close games against ranked teams on the road. So this next stretch of the away games and even the home games, maybe Baylor's an exception. It's a tough month now for TCU, no question.
But it'll really prove if TCU is playoff worthy or not, for sure. Also, just wanted to throw another thing in. Ben mentioned with all the different receivers getting in the mix. Shout out to Taj Williams, one of the top receivers from last year, finally getting not only a catch, but a touchdown reception in that. I don't know, me personally, I was happy to see him back out there. It was his only catch of the game, but I was happy to see him get that touchdown.
Yeah, and for me, it speaks volumes to the fact. I think, was it Taj Williams' first catch of the season?
I'm not sure if it was his first catch, but it wasn't much. I don't think that could have been like his third, like, max.
Okay, and you said he's the leading receiver a year ago. I think it speaks volumes to how deep and how talented this TCU wide receiver core is. The fact that your leading receiver from a year ago and now struggles to get on the field. Guys like Jalen Reagor coming in and making an impact almost instantaneously. John Diarse has become a guy who you can throw out there on almost every single snap. If he's not tired, he's got to be out there. He's played that well to this point, and even getting Desmond White back from, was he hurt last year? I think he was, right?
Dez?
Yeah.
No, he just didn't play as much. He might have gotten hurt at some point, but I just don't think he played as much last year.
Regardless, he just stepped up and gotten an opportunity to see the field a lot more. I think, like I said, it just speaks volumes to this receiving core. One downside for me, I don't know. I always seem to overcomplicate things. You win 43-0. There's not a lot to talk about badly, but extra points. Jonathan Song missed one 2 weeks ago against Kansas State. He missed another one last Saturday against Kansas. Cole Bunce also missed one as well. Again, none of those extra points have been important, but coming into the Kansas State game, we were perfect in field goals and extra points. Now it's a little shaky, obviously kicking being an issue. It's still fresh in, I think, all TCU fans' minds what happened last year with the kicking problems and the woes that we had in that department. Are you guys a little worried?
I wouldn't say I'm a little worried. I think it's definitely something to look at. Jonathan Song has nearly been automatic, so it was definitely a bit of a surprise for him to miss that one extra point. But if you kind of miss some, get them out of the way now when you're kind of up and they really aren't as important. But I just, maybe it's I don't know what it is in his funk, but got to figure it out at some point. But overall, I think every kicker is going to miss extra points. They're not robots.
Yeah, extra points aren't exactly a given. It's true.
Yeah, something to look at. Yeah, definitely with the extra points. Knock on wood, haven't missed a field goal yet. But again, yeah, just something to look at, keep an eye on. But I'm not too worried about it.
Okay, and then one last thing, Kevontae Turpin. What a 90-yard punt return for a touchdown he had I believe it was to break this game wide open if it wasn't wide open already. Interesting note on that, he also opened up the scoring with a punt return for a touchdown in this game in 2015, the last time Kansas came to Fort Worth. So he seems to like it when the Jayhawks come to town.
Yeah, good to see him. Good to see him back and a little bit of his old self.
All right, well, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we will talk some World Series. Houston and Los Angeles wrapped up Game 2 on Wednesday night. Game 3 set to get started tonight.
5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease. And another 16 million husbands, wives, children, and friends are caregivers. But the right foods may help you prevent it. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, the same foods that fight diabetes and heart disease can also keep your brain strong and memory sharp. Let's eat right to fight Alzheimer's. Visit eattofightalzheimers.org.
Type 2 diabetes is a serious chronic health threat in America. It affects tens of millions of people. Many people who have the disease don't know it. Diabetes can cause health problems such as heart disease, strokes, amputations, and blindness. Talk to your doctor, get screened if you're at risk, and learn how to avoid becoming one of the millions of new cases of diabetes each year. You can help prevent type 2 diabetes. A message from CDC and HHS.
Welcome back to Friday Night Sports right here on KTCU. Let's talk some World Series, guys. Houston is tied with Los Angeles 1-1 after the first two games in LA. The series now heads back to Houston. I'll start with Game 1. Los Angeles won 3-1 in that game, and for me, the biggest thing, there's a lot of talk about postseason Clayton Kershaw and the struggles he had. So much for that, he was dominant in Game 1.
Yeah, Kershaw had an absolutely fantastic start. Gave up a fourth inning home run to Alex Bregman, but still went 7 innings, only gave up 3 hits, that one of them being that home run. But struck out 11 guys. Really looked like the regular season Clayton Kershaw that we're all used to seeing for the past couple of years. Maybe he could be turning around his postseason funk. Who knows? But it was definitely good to see, especially if you're a Dodger fan.
Yeah, I gave him exactly what the Dodgers needed. He gave him 7 innings. Probably could have gone longer since he only threw about 85 pitches. But you got to figure, hey, we're going to use him later in the series, especially now. It's not going to be a 4-game series for sure. It's going to be 5, and so then you get him to tomorrow in the 8th inning, and then you get him to Jansen in the 9th, and game 1 at least it was pretty automatic. And the Dodgers were 27-1 when you get Kenley Jansen and Brandon Morrow in the game. And we'll talk about game 2, which that changed. But a great outing from Kershaw, exactly what the Dodgers needed.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in almost any other bullpen or on any other team, Kershaw probably goes out for that 8th inning. But like you said, James, Brandon Morrow, what a revelation. He's been converted starter now, kind of becoming the setup guy. He's been so good out of that bullpen, kind of bridging the gap for the bullpen to Kenley Jansen, who's been almost automatic, obviously, like you said, in game 2 a little differently. But the way he's pitched in the first 2 games of the series has been really impressive for me.
Yeah, Brandon Morrow, starter turned relief pitcher. Dodgers have done that also with Kenta Maeda, and it's just really turned out well for them. They when you get turned into a relief pitcher, you can focus a bit more on. You can try and throw a bit harder because you're going all out for 1 or 2 innings. Focus on. They can get a lot. I feel like they can probably get a lot more break on their pitches. I feel like turning them into a relief pitcher can give them a bit more confidence.
And for Morrow, he's really a contact guy. I mean, he didn't register a strikeout. You just get ground balls or fly outs, and that's all they need. So as long as you get the 3 outs, no runs, no hits, you've done your job.
And let's talk a little bit. I'll give a little bit of love to this LA offense. Obviously, leading off the game, Chris Taylor hit the leadoff home run. We talked about Brandon Morrow and the kind of revelation he's been. Well, Chris Taylor's been the exact same for this Dodgers lineup.
Yeah, so he only had 1 career home run coming into this season, and hit 21 over the course of the season.
He's got 24 now if you include the postseason.
Right.
So.
And I saw it, like the John Smoltz, Joe Buck, and everyone when they were talking about it. He's really changed his swing and his approach at the plate. Bats in a different spot. He's loading a bit more. Just a great job of the Dodgers hitting coach, whoever he is.
Turner Ward.
Turner Ward, for really changing his swing style. And, I mean, he has been outstanding for the Dodgers.
He's also young, which is just going also in the Dodgers' favor. This is a pretty young team, and if you can keep him around, he's in center field. He's really the keystone of that Dodgers outfield. If you can keep him around for a while, he's going to be there. He's going to mash, which he showed this season.
And another guy who has also been mashing in that lineup, Justin Turner. He had a go-ahead home run in the 6th inning that proved to be the difference. I know Giancarlo Stanton's got to be clear front runner, but does this guy have an outside shot at the NL MVP?
I mean, as I think we've all talked about, as much as it shouldn't count, I think the baseball writers take postseason stats into account, even though MVP is pretty much based on the regular season. I mean, Turner still had a fantastic season. Batted .322 with 21 home runs, 71 RBIs. He did miss about a month. But I mean, postseason, Justin Turner has been absolutely outstanding. Can't say anything really bad about how he's done. But to answer your question, I still don't think it changes the MVP votes.
I think the only MVP shot he has right now is probably the World Series MVP if the Dodgers go on to win it. NL MVP, it just, as you said, MVP should not count, but everybody, and it's in the back of everybody's minds. So I don't think he has a great shot, but I mean, no doubt he just turned it up another notch, if that's even possible, for the Dodgers in this postseason.
And moving on to Game 2, and what a fun one that one was. Houston, of course, getting the big win on the road, winning by a score of 7-6, the final in 11 innings. Astros starter Justin Verlander was near perfect through 4 innings, looked unhittable, And then all of a sudden, it just kind of fell apart for him late. Luckily, I think I heard Joe Buck say a couple times in that game, Verlander's been there to pick up the Houston offense when they've been sputtering a couple times this season, and now it was the Astros offense turn to do it, and they did just that.
Yeah, I mean, Justin Verlander, since the Houston's acquisition of Justin Verlander, I don't think they've lost a game that he's started in regular season and postseason. He's been absolutely dominant. I mean, barring a couple bad pitches, still had pitched six pretty strong innings, struck out 5. Again, gave up 3 runs. But I mean, Verlander's been, I think that spark that Houston really needed.
But also only gave up 2 hits.
Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So he didn't have many runners on base. It doesn't seem like, and when he did, the one time it was Corey Seager, right? Mm-hmm. Really just beat him on a ball, and you could look at how much work he's got in this postseason. He pitched those 9 innings against the Yankees. He pitched, I want to say 7 maybe in his last start against the Yankees. So this guy's labored, and while he has experience in the postseason, he's not young. He's in his mid-30s, so. Got to give that some thought as well.
And, James, you mentioned Verlander only giving up 2 hits. You look at the stat line of the game, you would not think that this game should have been close. Houston had 7 runs on 14 hits. Dodgers had 6 runs on 5 hits. Just really interesting to look at. I think this was the first game of the World Series. I mean, there's only been 2. This is the first time that the Dodgers didn't score every single run on the long ball. Kike Hernandez came in clutch in that with that 10th inning base hit. But credit to the Dodgers offense of getting the hits when they needed, and shows not a glaring problem, but a problem that should be taken notice for Houston, not being able to cash in when they needed to.
Yeah, I think I remember telling you, Mitch, at least once, probably twice early on in that game, the way Verlander was pitching, it felt like he should have had like a 3 or 4 run lead because Houston threatened so many times early on. I think at one point they had like six of the first 6 runners on. They got the first guy on in 6 of the 8 innings. First 8 innings, so they did a great job of getting him on. Just struggled to get guys in and get a real good lead for Justin Verlander. That obviously, and then Verlander just kind of makes 2 mistakes, and that's ultimately the difference. But let's move on to the later portion of this game where things got really interesting. I want to start with something really cool that I found. Marwin Gonzalez, of course, hit the game-tying home run off Kenley Jansen. They lead off the top of the 9th, and a guy that was hitting just 187 in the postseason going into that bat. Don't know about you guys, but I think that's what's so interesting about postseason baseball.
Can't be postseason baseball. I mean, really. I do want to point out that George Springer actually went 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts in Game 1. Turned it around in Game 2, went 3 for 5 to RBI, including that clutch home run in the 11th inning off Brendan McCarthy. So he turned it around, and really everybody in the Astros lineup, in the starting lineup, except for Brian McCann and Verlander, obviously, got a hit. So when you play 11 innings of baseball, everyone gets another couple of shots. So a lot of credit to this Houston offense being able to figure some things out, get to that LA bullpen, which really seemed to be unhittable. And people said that about the Yankee bullpen, and they did the same thing. So this you got to give some credit to the Astros in figuring out. Okay, how do we hit against this guy, even if he's said to be unhittable?
Yeah, and I think for me, you mentioned that LA bullpen. The difference was in Game 1, the Stars struggled for LA. Guys like George Springer, Jose Altuve, Carlos Correa, but those 3 guys all homered, especially, and had big time home runs in extra innings. So I think that was the difference. Was Houston, the big bats came to play, and the guys that you expected to be great and have to be great in a World Series type atmosphere, and in that kind of game that Houston, I felt like, really needed to win. Those guys stepped up. On the flip side, Justin Turner, Cody Bellinger combined 0 for 9. The Stars were stars in Game 2. And I think that was the difference.
Yeah. Sorry, James. You mentioned for the Astros, the big guys struggled. Only 2 out of the first 4 batters for the Houston lineup. So Springer, Bregman, Altuve, and Correa. There were only 2 hits in Game 1 between the 4 of them. Game 2. The 4 of them combined for 9 hits overall, so big turnaround for them.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we will preview a pretty interesting game coming up this weekend as fourth-ranked TCU goes on the road to Ames, takes on newcomer to the top 25, number 25, Iowa State. We'll break that one down. We'll preview that one right after this.
Type 2 diabetes is a serious chronic health threat in America. It affects tens of millions of people. Many people who have the disease don't know it. Diabetes can cause health problems such as heart disease, strokes, amputations, and blindness. Talk to your doctor, get screened if you're at risk, and learn how to avoid becoming one of the millions of new cases of diabetes each year. You can help prevent type 2 diabetes. A message from CDC and HHS.
I'm Rachel Ray, and food is not only the way I make my living, it's how I spend time with my family and friends. It's hard to imagine true hunger, but sadly, 1 in 6 Americans don't know where their next meal will come from. They're your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger to find out how you can make a difference. I'm Rachel Ray, and together, we are Feeding America.
A message from Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Friday Night Sports, guys. Let's preview a pretty exciting game between TCU and Iowa State. Obviously, a top 25 matchup and a big road game for the Horned Frogs. And this point of the season, especially when you're undefeated, brings with it another challenge for this TCU team to overcome. And for the next 2 weeks, it's going to be a couple of really serious trap games. First up, a road trip to Ames, take on the Iowa State Cyclones. TCU obviously hasn't lost there since 2012, but Iowa State's playing their best football this season, if not in the past couple of seasons. Let me get your opening thoughts on what this Iowa State team brings to the table.
Well, this is really a tale of two similar teams. Both teams are allowing 15.2 points a game. Both teams shut out Kansas. TCU leads the Big 12 in scoring defense. Iowa State's right behind them at third. And Iowa State leads the Big 12 in pass defense while TCU follows them in second. Scoring is going to be at a premium in this game with both defenses performing at the highest level in the Big 12.
With Iowa State, their defense has been key in their games. In their 2 losses, one against Iowa and against Texas, they lost the turnover battle. But the other 5 games, they've won the turnover battle, and that's been huge for Iowa State, getting them the ball back. And then with Kyle Kemp coming in and really doing such a good job at quarterback, he's been able to help lead Iowa State.
Yeah, you mentioned that Cyclone defense. It's really a group that's come on of late, especially was a slow start because if you guys remember, they gave up 44 points to what's a pretty average Iowa offense in a really frustrating loss. But since then, the upset win over Oklahoma, they held the Sooners to just 31 points and only 7 in the second half. They held Texas 17 points, albeit in a loss. They shut out Kansas, and they held a really high-octane, potent Texas Tech offense to just 13 points last week. That defense gets doesn't get as much credit probably as it deserves because the offense, in my opinion at least, has got a bunch of really talented guys. I'll start with out wide. Allen Lazard and Hakeem Butler are going to be serious matchup problems for TCU because both of them are really big guys. Lazard 6'5", Butler 6'6". That could pose a lot of problems for the TCU secondary.
Well, I think for Iowa State as well, another player to look for is they love David Montgomery, but he's all they've got at running back. Carried the ball 49 times combined in the past 2 weeks and ran all over the Texas Tech defense, averaging 5.9 yards a carry. Montgomery's also been utilized out of the backfield, so the TCU defense will need to be looking for screen passes out of that. So he's really he is a power back, but he's also a passing back as well.
I wouldn't be so sure about that, James. Mike Warren is a guy who burst onto the scene in the Big 12 as a true freshman a couple years ago with a 1,000-yard season for Iowa State. He's been banged up all throughout the year. But I think he's at the point where he might be finally getting healthy. If he is, that becomes a pretty dynamic duo. I know Iowa State prefers David Montgomery, and he's obviously deserving to be the starting running back in that offense. But Mike Warren's a guy who could give Montgomery a couple of rests throughout the game because he's shown that he can be productive in the Big 12.
Well, even with a good run game that Iowa State has, I mean, the TCU defensive line has been so good this season. Matt Bosen and Ben Banogu really lead the way. TCU has just allowed 2.6 yards per carry this season. They've done a great job at shutting down the run pretty much every single game they've played. But Ben, like you mentioned earlier, it's going to be tough for the secondary. Tejada and I don't know how tall Gladney is, but I know Tejada's under 6 feet.
And Gladney's right at it.
Okay, so Gladney's right. It's gonna be tough with how big Iowa State's receivers are.
Yeah, and the guy throwing him the ball, like we said, senior QB Kyle Kemp talked about that upset over Oklahoma. Pretty cool story. He obviously didn't know he was going to be the starter until the day before the game, leads Iowa State into Norman, and it comes out with an upset win. I think that's kind of almost kickstarted this group in a sense because they are playing some really good football, and it all started with that big-time win over Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, they've been riding that high, and I thought they might tank a little bit after the Oklahoma win because it boosted them up so much, but it's done the total opposite and taken it and ran with it. So a lot of credit to them, and this may seem a little trivial, but weather is certainly going to play a factor in this game. They're expecting 30 to 40 degree weather with some sort of precipitation. Could be rain, sleet, or snow. Really don't know. Iowa State has played in these conditions before, and they live in them, while the Horned Frogs are used to the comfort of warmer temperatures. So both teams are going to have to play in it. So a little bit like the Michigan State game, it's not going to help either team, but it's definitely going to hurt TCU a little bit more than will Iowa State.
And you mentioned, Iowa State getting the luxury of playing at home, albeit in probably some pretty poor weather. But this is an Iowa State group that I think Gary Patterson, especially all week, has talked about like how well, how tough it is to go to Ames and win, and how well they play at home. But when you look at their schedule, it speaks the opposite because, like I said, they're regarded as such a tough place to play. But their 2 losses have come at home, but to Iowa and Texas, and even in 2 of their wins, I mean, they weren't exactly all that impressive in their season opener over Northern Iowa, giving up 24 points in that game. And then obviously the win against Kansas, we saw what TCU did to Kansas last week. Iowa State did about the same thing. So this is a team that almost has might almost have the same mentality as TCU in that they play better on the road. That could be something that would be interesting to watch as the season when during this game because maybe Iowa State, you would think they're going to come out with a fire litter under them and ready to prove to the college football world that they can really that they're for real, but they're also at home, and I think that might give them a false sense of security because TCU is going to come ready to play because they've heard all the talk about how good this Iowa State team is.
And I just want to go back to defense. TCU leads the Big 12 in rushing defense, like I mentioned earlier. Iowa State is third in the Big 12 in rushing defense. And against the pass, Iowa State is the number 1 team in the Big 12 in passing defense, and TCU is the number 2 team in passing defense. So I don't know. Like James also mentioned, weather's going to play a big factor, but it's just going to be real tough.
It definitely sets up to be a pretty low-scoring affair in that one. And finally, let's finish off tonight's show with another segment of college football pick'em as we preview Week 9's games. A quick rundown of the standings. Mitch leads still atop the leaderboards, 29-11 record, and me and James are tied for second with a record of 27-13. And let's waste no time. Let's start with that game we've been previewing for the past couple of minutes. Number 4 TCU goes on the road, takes on number 25 Iowa State, who are in the top 25 for the first time in 12 years. They're riding a 3-game winning streak. Can they get a marquee win over the Horned Frogs and make it 4 in a row?
TCU's defensive line will be the difference maker for me. Iowa State struggled against Texas the last time they faced, which was the last time they faced a big physical defensive line. Kyle Kemp has the accuracy but not the arm strength of Jacob Park, but nonetheless, he's played unexpectedly well and has led this team since Park's exit. I think this will be a close game, not an offensive juggernaut like it has been in the past. The weather will not be on the side of the Horned Frogs, but Iowa State will be playing in that same weather, so it's going to be tough on both teams. I'll take TCU in a close one.
It's always tough going on the road to face Iowa State. But with how good TCU has played on both sides of the ball, Kenny Hill's done so well this season at quarterback, and the defense has been absolutely outstanding. I've got TCU.
Yeah, I think Kenny Hill is ultimately the difference. His experience and ability to perform under pressure will ultimately allow TCU to go into Ames and come out with a tough and hard-fought and narrow, but albeit a victory, and that's the most important thing. I think that's the difference is Kenny Hill's experience. Let's move on to another really interesting Big 12 game coming up this weekend. Number 11, Oklahoma State goes on the road, takes on number 22, West Virginia. These two teams looked very unconvincing in wins last week, but a win in this game would do a lot for their Big 12 championship hopes. Who comes out on top?
Well, it'll be a tough atmosphere to play in Stillwater, but this marquee matchup of talented quarterbacks will be a fun one to watch if you like offense. Mason Rudolph leads the nation in passing yards per game, and Will Greer leads the nation with 26 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, while posting a school record of 7 straight 300-yard performances. The run game will be an important factor too, keeping an eye on Justice Hill of the Cowboys, Justin Crawford of the Mountaineers. Mason Rudolph has gotten the best of West Virginia the past 2 years, and I think that streak ends this weekend. I'll take West Virginia to get a win on the road against Oklahoma State.
West Virginia is at home.
Oh, crap.
With everything being said, James pretty much hit a bunch of the key points. Will Greer leading the nation with 26 touchdowns. David Sills has been outstanding at wide receiver. With 15 receiving touchdowns on the season. I think with West Virginia being at home, it's definitely going to be a tough environment for Oklahoma State. Any game is really tough on the road, pretty much. And so I've got the Mountaineers as well.
Well, I thought I'd be in the minority in this one, but I will also take the Mountaineers. You mentioned those 15 touchdowns from David Sills. That's leads the FBS. He also has 8 in the last 3 games, become Will Greer's favorite target. That's a dynamic duo for West Virginia. I think this game, because this game's in Morgantown and at home for WVU, they get a win. And there's a plethora of top 25 matchups this weekend. Let's move on to another one. Number 9, Notre Dame welcomes number 14, NC State to town. This Wolfpack gets set for a really big 2-game stretch that will either make or break them this year. Starts with a road trip to South Bend. Like I said, they take on a hot Notre Dame team coming off a really impressive win over USC. Can the Wolfpack get a win in Indiana?
Well, here's a matchup of 2 different quarterbacks in Ryan Finley, who really is a pocket passer and will only scramble if he needs to. And for the Irish, Brandon Wimbush is not afraid to run the ball. He can beat you through the air and on the ground. NC State's defensive line has only given up an average of 91 yards per game on the ground. And if Bradley Chubb, a preseason All-American, can step up like he's done in nearly every other game for NC State, he's no question going to be a game changer. In South Bend, it's going to be a rough environment and not one that NC State has faced yet this season, but I'll take the Wolfpack on the road.
Notre Dame has an absolutely fantastic run game, and while they don't have the best passing attack, they can still make some big plays through the air. Playing at home and with the success they've had in recent weeks, especially against, a tough team in USC, I've got the Fighting Irish at home.
Yeah, you mentioned Bradley Chubb. I think this Wolfpack defense, I think they're for real. They're going to cause all sorts of problems for this Notre Dame offense. They're obviously going to try and make Notre Dame beat them through the air. I think if they're successful in doing that, they have a really good chance of winning. I think they will. I picked against Notre Dame last week and it cost me, but I'm going to do it again. I got NC State in an upset. And let's move on to a big-time game in the ACC, Saturday night prime time. Number 7, Clemson welcomes Georgia Tech to town. Clemson lost its first game in the last 11 months 2 weeks ago when they went on the road and fell to Syracuse. Quarterback Kelly Bryant says he's ready to go, coming off a concussion and an ankle injury, but he says he's 100%. He'll have to be because this Georgia Tech team's only losses were by 1 point this season. Can the Tigers bounce back and keep their national championship hopes alive?
I think Clemson will rebound. They've had a week off to think about Georgia Tech and put the Syracuse loss behind them. However, Georgia Tech is a different animal. They run the triple option, but when forced to throw, they will. Clemson's defense has done exceptionally well at stopping the rush all season. They'll have to do that if they hope to avoid losing 2 weeks in a row. If Clemson can stop the quarterback and the running back of Georgia Tech, who combined for over 1,000 yards, it's all over for the Yellow Jackets. I'll take Clemson, which I haven't said all year.
Clemson's defense, James mentioned it, they're so good. They've only allowed 107 yards on the ground, and Georgia Tech isn't going to beat anyone through the air, obviously, with the triple option attack, an occasional pass here and there. And I think if Kelly Bryant can, he says he's healthy, and if he really is healthy, I think Clemson's going to take this one.
Yeah, not only does the bye week for Clemson help them get past their loss to Syracuse, also gives them an extra week to prepare for this Georgia Tech offense. I think that's the difference. This defense will play lights out. I got the Tigers by at least 2 touchdowns. And finally, the big game of the week, game day, is in Columbus for number 2 Penn State taking on number 6 Ohio State. Ohio State Michigan is often regarded as the game, but you could make a serious argument this is the game of the Big Ten Conference. The Nittany Lions are unbeaten and ranked number 2 in the country, while the Buckeyes are looking to overcome an early season loss to Oklahoma. Who wins?
Ohio State's offense has had no trouble getting going since they lost at home to Oklahoma. This is JT Barrett's time to shine and really show if he is ready for the big games, which historically have not been very nice to him. There will be no question that there's a lot of pressure on Saquon Barkley to produce in the run game, but also in the passing game. I think with the game being at Ohio State, that helps a lot. I'm going to take Ohio State for the upset win over Penn State.
Playing in Columbus is, it's probably one of the toughest places to play, and it's such a huge rivalry matchup with Penn State and Ohio State. It's really tough. Ohio State, they're 6-1. Their one loss did come at home to Oklahoma, and while J.T. Barrett and the rest of the Ohio State team has done well, they haven't really stacked up against too tough of competition. And I think Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley are going to come in, run the show. I've got the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, the Horseshoe is such a tough place to go for any opponent. Ohio State's been so tough to beat. Like you guys have said, J.T. Barrett's really turned it around since that loss. I think Ohio State is joint first, if not second, in college football in points per game. So that offense is really starting to play well. But the biggest criticism against J.T. Barrett has been since his freshman year. This guy has struggled mightily on the big stage in big-time games. He hasn't shown me anything to believe otherwise or believe that that's changed to this point. I think that's going to continue. A rough night for J.T. Barrett. Look out for a big night for Saquon Barkley because it's going to be cold and rainy, so he should get the ball about 35 to 40 times in terms of total touches. I think Penn State knocks off the Buckeyes for the second year in a row and stays unbeaten. Well, that's going to do it for us here on Friday Night Sports. For James Flowers and Mitchell Lefebvre, I'm Ben Ott. And if you missed anything from tonight's show, you can find a replay of it on Facebook. Page name is Friday Night Sports, or on Twitter at Friday Night Sports. That's FRINIGHTSPORTS. We'll be back here at the same time next Friday talking more college football and the World Series. But until then, y'all have a good weekend. Good night, everyone.